Our scripture reading this morning comes from the book of Psalms. I've taken refuge in you, Lord. Don't let me ever be put to shame. Deliver me and rescue me by your righteousness. Bend your ear toward me and save me. Be my rock and refuge, where I can always escape. You command that my life be saved because you are my rock and my fortress. My God, rescue me from the power of the wicked. Rescue me from the grip of the wrongdoers and the oppressors, because you are my hope, Lord. You, Lord, are the one I've trusted since childhood. I've depended on you from birth. You cut the cord when I came from my mother's womb. My praise will always be with you, about you. I've become an example to many because you are my strong refuge. My mouth is filled with your praise, glorifying you all day long. Don't cast me off in old age. Don't abandon me when my strength is used up. Now, your bulletin says there is another text, and there is. If you want to read it this afternoon, by all means, do so. But you know how stories go. They often start with the men, the sons of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, then the 12 sons, and then their sons and their sons and their sons for 20 generations. Really? They would be nowhere, and I mean it, they would be nowhere. They would not exist except for Sarah and Rebecca and Leah and Rachel and Bilhah and Zilpah, daughters who birthed the sons, children, and their daughters for 20 generations. And so I tell you my story because I am one of them, a daughter of a daughter of a daughter. I heard the edict. There was really no way to escape it. It was on the tongues of everyone, everywhere you walked. If there was an Egyptian, the words were on their lips. In the marketplace where the servants of Pharaoh came, the words were on their lips. In the soldiers guarding different places throughout the city, there were the words on their lips. And every time any one of them saw a Hebrew woman, they made sure to say those words: no more baby boys. I saw it and heard it in my own fear as I watched my own two children, Aaron and Miriam. I was blessed to have them. Other women hadn't been so lucky. Either their pregnancies had failed or their children succumbed to pestilence and disease. And then there were those who had done what they needed to do to not bring a child into this world at this time. They knew in that moment what I did not. They knew the cost of loss. And yet, I already hoped. I already hoped because there it was, that feeling in my body that I trusted that there would be yet another child born under Pharaoh's reign. Under Pharaoh's reign of terror, a child would be born. Maybe, just maybe, in the next few months, Pharaoh's heart will change. Maybe. I held on to that hope. But then they were called Shiphrah and Puah. They were called the midwives who had helped me bear my children, and countless other children were called to Pharaoh to account. Pharaoh called us an infestation. an infestation to be exterminated. And any exterminator knows that in order to get rid of it, you have to go to the heart, to the center of the nest where life begins. And Pharaoh thought he could do that because he thought that the source of life was the male body. You and I know that the true source of life is the love of God, the God of the midwives who bring us all into life. Pharaoh had no ability to get to that heart. He had no ability whatsoever. And we know that midwives have strong arms and warm hands to bring life into the world, that they are God's presence in every birth. They who touch the tender and precarious life at its first breath know that no policy, no procedure, no pronouncement that promotes death is of God. I watched them walk. Prodded as they were by the guards, they didn't go in a straightforward way, the most direct route to Pharaoh's palace. They were in a circuitous route. And as they went, they touched their hand to the doorpost of every house in which they had birthed a child. And as they touched it in silent blessing, they received from the mothers within the strength and courage and wisdom they would need as they walked in light towards a man whose heart was darkened by fear. We breathed a sigh of relief when they returned, but one look, just one look at their faces tinged our hope with fear and trepidation. They had stood before Pharaoh. They had spoken truth to power. They had defied his order and lived. They said that the power of life was too strong in the Hebrew women. They gave birth so quickly that we weren't there, and you cannot dispatch a baby so easily once his mother has seen it. They returned, and we knew that their defiance and our defiance would not be tolerated. Absolute power was absolute, and it would do anything to maintain that power. In a few short months, these women, imbued with the power of all women, Shiphrah and Puah, would receive the birth of my own son into their tender hands. Thanks be to God, the creator of the universe. But the edict didn't go away. It was still there, pervasive and tormenting. I hid my child. Do you know how difficult it is to hide a newborn? Do you have any idea what it takes to keep him quiet and small and out of the way of any prying eyes or ears? I did everything I could. But it became more and more difficult, more and more dangerous for him, for me, for my husband and my children. I knew I had to do something. So I went to the river and I gathered the reeds and I wove a basket. I wove it with every fiber of my being tight and secure. They'll say that I covered it with pitch, but I wove it with love and covered it with all the hope I had, knowing that at most I would give my son 2 days before he died of exposure. But those 2 days were far better than the fate that would await him if I did nothing. How could I stand by and let the soldiers rip the child from my arms and toss him in the river? How can I bear it? How long would my heart sing the song of lamentation and grief if that were to happen? So the river and the ark that would bear my hope and life with it was all I had. So early in the morning, I took him with his breath sweet from milk, his eyes fluttering on the brink of a satisfied sleep. I took him to the river and I put him in. What kind of a world is it when a mother would do this? When this is better than the alternative? What kind of a world is better when the child crosses the river in a basket than stays in the arms of his mother? What evil fear grips the hearts of the powerful so that they do not see the humanity in others, not even a baby? My tears mingled with the thousands of mothers whose hearts were already broken with death and loss beyond measure. Then I sent my daughter too. She, at my bidding, stepped into the river alone, with hope and courage. A child herself, she stepped in to protect the life of her brother. No greater love has anyone than to risk the life for their brother or sister. She pushed that little ark. She guided it across the river to a place of possibility, a small place perhaps, to a place where life would hang in the balance, be discovered, and die, or die trying to find a source of love and life. She hid the basket and moved down the river. I heard the edict. It was hard to miss. I escaped the confines of the palace as often as I could, but not as often as I wanted. I took attendance as a princess must, but they were trusted. They knew how constrained I felt, how confined by luxury and privileged I was. But there at the edge of the river, in the privacy of the reeds, I would take off my finery and step into the water and wash away the dust and dirt of the street for sure, but also the stink and stench and stain of injustice and empire. I stood in those river amongst the reeds in those moments free to be a young woman, a life bearer immersed in the river of life. I loved those moments of true freedom, to seek with my deepest longings to be this free in all the things I do. I've learned, though, that freedom often requires some imagination. I heard it before I really perceived it, the shrill, trilling sounds of women in grief, standing across the river, their hair covered in ash, their tears marking rivers in their faces, arms empty, breasts aching, hearts broken. And then I saw them, one after another, body after body. Tiny ones tossed with cold hearts. The carrion circled, The crocodiles moved with intent through the flowing water, water made from parents' tears. How could I bear it? At my father's hand, such travesty. He thinks I don't know. He thinks I don't see. He thinks I don't care, wrapped up in luxury and privilege, but it's his arrogance and his fear that makes me complicit in this destruction of life. I dunked under the water to clear my head, to blot out, if just for a moment, the sounds of mother's anguish. And when I came up, I saw it. A basket, an ark floating nearby, carried by the currents and the eddies into the reeds along the shoreline. I reached, and I saw the baby, a Hebrew baby boy, several months old. I held him and I cried. What does it take for a mother to do this? What risk has she taken to keep him safe for so long? What kind of hope is there for a child? A day or two of life? That's all that could be imagined. No future, no possibility. Held him. I held him and I cried. I cried for his mother, for all the mothers. I cried for my part in the whole thing. I cried and cried and cried, holding the baby, showering him with my tears. And then she approached, a child herself, eyes filled with equal measure of fear and hope. She knew as she stepped forward, as she peeked out of the reeds, that she came not because she was brave, but she knew she had to do it, afraid or not at all. Life demanded this of her. Together, she and I were knee-deep in resistance, and together we would defy evil and hatred by doing this one small thing. I sat by the river's edge, unable to eat, unable to be consoled. I watched the sun move across the sky, the carrion circling above. I sat and exhausted all hope, angry at the world in which it was the best that I could do to send my child in a basket alone across the river, to send his sister behind him, without knowing if I would ever see them again, or if they would ever live or die. I sat at the river's edge. Then Miriam came back. She told me the story of Pharaoh's daughter who wanted to keep the child, who would raise the baby, but needed what I could give, the milk of life, and so we made a deal. I would keep him until he was weaned, and he would return to grow in Pharaoh's house. She knew, Pharaoh's daughter, that he was a Hebrew boy. His circumcision would make it obvious to even the most dull-witted person. She knew, and she spoke the truth. That is always a brave thing to do. He is a Hebrew boy, and just because he is worthy of life. She promised to adopt him, which is always a sacrament of love and lamentation. He would live. The story will continue because of women, a mother, a daughter, midwives, and a princess, an unlikely group of women who would change the world. What kind of a world is it when a mother would do this? Put the child in the river alone with the smallest chance that he or she will live. What kind of a world? Where are the mothers lamenting this day? Where is the death dealing that's going on? How can we take the strength and the courage of all these mothers, the gentle touch of a midwife to bring new life? How can we join our stories with theirs so that there will be a future, so that there will be hope, and so that we can step into an imagination in which all children can grow and thrive and be loved? What just might be if we are strong and brave and hold on to hope? Just what might be. Amen.